Hey everybody, Jared Plew here from Infinity Title in St. George, Utah. Today we're going to be talking about defaults and foreclosures. This is a topic that I was looking at very closely back between 2008 and 2012. I felt like it was the number one indicator on the current state of our market and economy and what direction we were headed. From that time, it's kind of become a non-factor, so I haven't looked at it real close, so I'm excited to dive back into it and maybe look at it more in depth and go over a few things with you. Again, if you're going to look at one thing right now, as I've said in previous videos, it should be rates, and more specifically the Fed funds rate. But let's jump into foreclosures. This is a graph over the last 30 years of foreclosures and defaults in Washington County. So you can see in 2009, that's when we peaked in Washington County. We had 3,078 notice of defaults filed. And then the following year in 2010 is when we peaked with foreclosures at 1,515. Moving forward along the graph there, you can see that in 2021 is when we probably bottomed out with notice of defaults. So we've been creeping back up a little bit. And then in 2022 probably bottomed out with foreclosures. Now, to understand why, you can see that foreclosures are a year behind, roughly a year behind the defaults. That's because the foreclosure process can take anywhere from 1 month to a year to happen. So what happens is when you don't make your payment, one of the first things the lender does is they go and file a notice of default at the county recorder's office. And then at least a month later, and usually it's more like 3 to 6 months later, is when that lender gets around to foreclosing on the property. And when they foreclose, they go to the building right across the street from me, literally on the courthouse steps. The trustee of that mortgage is gonna open the bidding at the minimum bid. If there's any investors there, they'll bid it up, and the highest bidder gets the property. If no one bids on it, it goes back to the bank. So anyways, so that's the process of foreclosure and why foreclosures are always delayed behind notice of defaults. So just to put it more in perspective of how low foreclosures are right now. So this year we've had a total of 21 foreclosures in Washington County. That's about 2.5 foreclosures per month. In 2010, when we peaked, we had 126 foreclosures every month. And then the average over the last 30 years is about 25 foreclosures per month. And then with defaults, same thing. So we've had 117 defaults so far this year. That's an average of about 13 per month. Back in 2009 when we peaked, we were experiencing 257 notice of defaults filed every single month. And then over the last 30 years, we've averaged about 50 notice of defaults per month. We're way below the average, and we are way below the peak that we experienced back in 2009 and 2010. To further illustrate how low foreclosures are right now, this is a graph that takes into account the number of households. So it's important to look at it in this light because over the last 30 years, Washington County has experienced a lot of growth. So the number of foreclosures that are happening today, it's hard to compare that to the number of foreclosures that were happening back in 1992 because that number has changed so much. I think the number of households back in 92 was below 20,000, and now we're well above 80,000. So we have over 4 times more households here in Washington County today than we did 30 years ago. Now, if the market never changed and foreclosures stayed the same per capita or per household, then this graph that we're looking at would just be a straight line. But as you can see, it's not. Because real estate is cyclical and there's lots of different things that can affect what happens in real estate. So looking at this, you can see in the last 2 years, these last few years, these bars are really high. So in 2022, there were over 10,000 households per foreclosure. Back in 2010, when we peaked in foreclosures, there were only 38 households per foreclosure. So you can see 38 versus over 10,000. So that further illustrates just how low foreclosures are right now. Now the question is why? Why are foreclosures so low right now? And there's a few different explanations, possible explanations of why that is, and I want to dive into some of those. Number one, foreclosure moratorium. So after the pandemic hit, the government came out and issued a moratorium on loans that for foreclosure on loans that were backed by the government. So if it was a lender that had a loan that was backed by the government, even if that borrower was 10 months in default, they still could not foreclose on. They were not allowed to foreclose on that property. Now, the foreclosure moratorium in most places, including Utah, ended around mid 2021, and then the longest it went anywhere, from my understanding, is mid 2022. So we are about over a year to 2 years past the moratorium ending. So I think it's safe to say that if there were any lenders that weren't foreclosing during the moratorium because they just weren't allowed to, those lenders would have foreclosed by now. So I don't think that that's a valid explanation of why foreclosures are so low right now. Another possible explanation is mortgage forbearance. So forbearance, just so you know, is going to your lender and saying, I can't make my payment, can we work something out? And it's important to understand that forbearance is not forgiveness. So when you go to your lender and say, hey, can I not make my payment for the next 3 months or 6 months? And the lender says, yes, that's fine. They're not saying, you know what, have the next 3 to 6 months on us. You don't have to reimburse us for that period of time that you don't make your payment. That's not what a forbearance is. It's not forgiveness. So if you agree to a 3-month forbearance, that means that at the end of that 3 months, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to say, okay, the balance that you didn't pay is due immediately, or over the next 6 months or whatever it is, you're going to have to increase your payment to recoup all that money that you didn't pay us during the time that you didn't make the mortgage payment. So there is inherent incentive for these borrowers that do a forbearance to do it for a short period of time. In fact, so from spring of 2020 to the end of 2021, 16% of borrowers in our country applied and received a forbearance. Half of those 16%, the forbearance was 3 months or less. The other half, it was 3 months or more, up to close to 2 years. So most of those people that did the forbearance, it was a short period of time, 3 months, 6 months max. And so again, it's safe to say that anybody that did do a forbearance, by now they've probably made up for it and they're back current and making that mortgage payment that's due and have paid off anything that they didn't pay during the forbearance. So if those aren't the two explanations, what could be a possible explanation? I've got a few ideas. I'd love to hear your ideas. Number one is home equity. Anybody that bought their home 2021 or before, you're sitting on some great equity in that home. So if you can't make your mortgage payment, don't let the bank take it back. Just sell the house and make money and go rent. Job supply. So I know that there's industries that have struggled the last year or so, my industry being one of them. And so people are losing their jobs, but unemployment is low. There's still job opportunities out there. There's other places, other industries that you can go to find a job and keep working and being able to make that mortgage payment, not going to default. And finally, interest rates. So I know mortgage interest rates are high right now, but most people that have an outstanding loan, their mortgage rate is low. If you got that loan 2022 or before, your chances are you're sitting on 4% or better on that loan. And so because your interest rate is low, that means your mortgage payment's low, you lose your job or things happen. I understand that things can happen, but if that payment's low, you can find a way to make that payment and keep that home. So those are the three things that I think are the biggest indicators of why more foreclosures are so low right now. But again, I'd love to hear from you. Now, in conclusion, The question I have for you, another question is this a good thing? I think I've established that foreclosures are super, super low right now in Washington County, probably across the country. So is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Um, in my opinion, they're at such a low level, it suggests that our real estate market was probably too good for too long, and there's a correction that has to happen. So I don't think it's healthy for us to experience this level of foreclosure for an extended period of time. I think that the foreclosures should tick back up, hopefully get more to the averages that we've experienced over the last 30 years. And that's more of a healthy level of where we should be. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear from you. In the next video, we're going to jump into building permits. It's a big hot topic in Washington County. Like I said, we've experienced so much growth that new construction has become such a huge part of our economy. And a huge part of our real estate market, that it's fun to jump into those building permits and see where we're at and see what's going on. So please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.